Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Fiedler. I have the honor of being president of this organization, the New England First Amendment Coalition. I want to thank all of you for coming and supporting what we're doing here today and honoring some very special people for doing some extraordinary work. First, this is the 4th annual Stephen Hamblett First Amendment Awards Luncheon, and it is the largest one we have had in our still young history. So again, thank you very much for coming here. I want to thank our host, the New England Newspaper and Press Association, which allows us to share the agenda here and bring us all together here at the Park Plaza. And I also want to thank all of the sponsors who are here. Their names are listed in your program and on the posters. And we could not be here without their support. And their support is a true demonstration of the Coalition's mission. I want to thank also those of you who generously made tickets available to students from several of our area universities. These are the people who will carry the flame. Northeastern is here, Suffolk Law, Emerson, the Boston College Law is here, Boston University Law, and my own College of Communication from Boston University. So again, I want to thank you for supporting them, and I certainly want to thank the students for being here. Also want to thank the God of Winter for scheduling this week's snow day earlier in the week. As you know, those of you who may have tried last year, we ended up having this pushed off until well after the flowers were blooming. So we're delighted that we were able to make it. And most of all, I want to thank all of you for coming. This is really a distinguished group. I could go table to table and start introducing some people here. Any one of you would be a worthy honoree, but I want to thank you for your support, both for taking time out of your schedule and certainly for the financial support that you're giving. And we do hope that your presence here and your interest in this subject will send a very strong signal to every citizen, and especially to those who might step on the First Amendment, and tell those that this is something precious and it would be noticed. For those of you who are engaging with us here in the New England First Amendment Coalition for the first time, a special welcome. The organization exists for the sole purpose of guaranteeing what may be the most fundamental cornerstone of our democracy, as Thomas Jefferson put it, an informed citizenry. That's what we do. That cannot happen if government is walled off from the people or its activities are hidden from them by ill-advised laws or ill-advised practices or ill-advised policies. So that's our mission. As defenders of the public's right to know, we're here today to honor 3 people who exemplify that mission. So again, I want to thank you for coming. Please enjoy your meals, and I'll be back in a few minutes and we'll get the program underway. Robert is, among his other duties as an attorney, by the way, he started as a newspaper reporter and went on into magazine journalism and then fell from grace and became a lawyer. But we're appreciate having him, and he serves as the outside general counsel of the New England Newspaper and Press Association, the New England First Amendment Coalition, and does also advising for a number of organizations, including the Student Press Law Center and the New England First Amendment Center. He chairs Prince LaBelle's Media and Intellectual Property Practice Group, and his area of expertise is in libel, access privacy, reporter's privilege, copyright, and trademark infringement, among others. He's a graduate of Wesleyan and Harvard Law School, and he is listed among the best lawyers in America, which we're privileged to have Robert on our board and presenting the first of our awards. Robert.
Thank you. We're honoring 3 First Amendment heroes today. But they're not the only First Amendment heroes in this room. I count 300 of you. To my eyes, every one of you who is working to keep up the public's right to know is a First Amendment hero. And God knows it's important business and timely business right now. Now, for sure, if you've listened to a federal judge order you to disclose your confidential sources for reporting on a matter of the most profound national interest, and you've responded to that judge respectfully, Your Honor, I decline, well, then you're playing a profound part in the struggle for First Amendment freedoms. But so too, if you've stood up and protested the closure of a small government town government meeting, if you've exercised your right to speak strongly and passionately about the issues that you care about, if you've reported on or written or spoken out on controversial issues, even though you know you're going to be offending a lot of people in doing so, then you're also working to keep the First Amendment strong. And if you've added your comment to the stream of responses on an online article, if you've gone into the internet or to a courthouse to obtain documents about a civil or criminal case, if you filed a public records request under the Federal Freedom of Information Act or any of its state public records law analogs, and if you've refused to take no for an answer, then you're helping to keep the First Amendment alive and strong. And by being here today, and by supporting the work of the New England First Amendment Coalition, you are all part of the team that's working to keep the First Amendment alive and strong. And for that, we thank all of you. Our first award this afternoon is the Antonia Orfield Citizenship Award. It recognizes the critical role that citizens, not just journalists, play in preserving and strengthening the public's right to know. It's awarded annually to an individual citizen of one of the 6 New England states who has fought for information crucial to the public's understanding of its community or what its government is doing, or, as the case may be, not doing. This year's recipient is Kit Savage. She's a mom in Darien, Connecticut, whose 9-year-old son is illiterate. He has severe dyslexia and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. She felt that he was not getting the services that he needed, even from the public schools of Darien on Connecticut's Gold Coast, a town whose high school is rated #1 by U.S. News and World Report. So she pushed back. She pushed some more. And she asked a lot of questions. And then when she didn't get answers, she filed a public records request under Connecticut law, and then another request, and then another request, and then another request. More often than not, her FOIA requests were ignored or answered incompletely or denied without any sound legal basis. But she pushed on, and she didn't take no for an answer. And as she did obtain documents, she learned some startling and disturbing things. With 23 other parents, last spring, Kit Savage filed a complaint with the Connecticut Department of Education, alleging that the school district had engaged in systematic violations of parental rights under the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The Department of Education in Connecticut looked into her allegations, and they concluded that the Darien public schools had violated state and federal laws by essentially screening out children who should have been eligible for special education services, and by also depriving those children's parents of any meaningful participation in the development of their children's individualized education plans, or IEPs. They did so by creating overly restrictive training materials and by unilaterally altering the IEPs of children with special needs without obtaining the required parental consent. An independent investigator who looked into the matter found that the school's practice was, in her words, inexcusable. Now, it's very fitting that Kit Savage receives this award in the first year since it has been renamed in memory of the late Dr. Antonia Orfield of Somerville, Massachusetts. Dr. Orfield was not a journalist. She was an optometrist, and she was a devoted mom, and she was an active citizen who worked to improve the public schools in Chicago and in Washington, D.C. And like Kit Savage, her own advocacy had a tie to children and to learning and learning differences. Early in her career, she operated a vision clinic at Mather Elementary School in Dorchester. And while there, she documented the degree to which vision-related remedies could help improve the academic performance of young students with learning differences. And her findings were published in her book in 2007 called Eyes for Learning: Preventing and Curing Vision-Related Learning Problems. So back to Kit Savage. After winning her FOIA battles, she took the pile of public records that she had obtained, and she went to David DeRoche, the assistant editor of the Darien Times. I imagine that James Risen would be one of the first to agree with me that even the best reporter is nothing without his or her sources. And boy, Kit Savage was one hell of a source. David has written more than 120 news stories that have arisen out of the information that she uncovered. And he says, quote, Kit Savage has likely done more to promote open government in Darien, Connecticut than anyone in the town's history. The Wall Street Journal has also reported on the matters that she raised and the results that her investigations uncovered. And Kit Savage, she's one of us now. She says she FOIAs for fun. We need people like her. As David DeRoche put it, she persevered. She has stood up for the town's most vulnerable children, and she embodies what it means to be a good citizen, to care about the greater good, and to hold those in power accountable. I'm very proud, on behalf of the New England First Amendment Coalition, to award the Antonia Orfield Citizenship Award to Kit Savage. Now I turn it over to Kit Savage.
Thank you very much. I'm a little nervous. Didn't expect all this, but I do FOIA for fun. It's a hobby now. But I want to thank the New England First Amendment Coalition for the Antonia Orfield Citizenship Award. I am honored to sit with the close friends and family of Ms. Orfield and hear how she helped children overcome their vision issues to learn to read. This award could not come at a better time to have my efforts recognized because of the troubled climate for parents with children with disabilities in my town of Darien. I am the parent of 2 children with disabilities. I try to stay a grounded realist because I know my children are amazing and bright, though they are also challenged. I am fortunate because my children's disabilities did not impair their intellect. They both have the cognitive ability with specialized services to perform at the same level as their non-disabled peers. I know my reputation as a problem parent in the school started there. I do not accept that my children cannot close the gap with their classmates. I have a sibling with learning disabilities who is a highly successful entrepreneur, and my parents always held the same high expectations for each of their children. This story that I can share is far too detailed for the 5 minutes I have for you now, but I can share the results that the State Department investigation had 2 scathing reports, that an independent investigation by a nationally respected expert in civil rights, Sue Gam, confirmed every allegation made in the parents' petition was accurate. The report confirmed 30 areas of violations of state and federal laws and pervasive issues throughout the school system. I can confirm that the superintendent, the director of special education, and the assistant director of special education have all resigned to avoid any serious consequences for themselves. I can tell you that many children's services that were illegally removed, we found evidence in the administration's intent to do so by using FERPA and FOIA. Without freedom of information, I doubt we would have achieved any of the above. That the town has been forced to initiate an audit of the $2 million that Darien Public Schools received in federal funding for their excess cost reimbursement applications. These applications are in question because when schools knowingly strip services from children's legal IEPs, there is evidence that there are discrepancies in cost accounting which may uncover fraudulence in the submissions sent to the state. That despite the Board of Ed hiring a cadre of educational experts, the battle for civil rights across Darien continues because few, if any, of those recommendations have reached our children. This is fundamentally a story about civil rights war being waged in Darien schools, but parents across the country have contacted us with similar suspicions about their schools and their communities. Our story, as you've heard, involves violations of laws, child abuse, petty local politics, corruption, lies, money, discrimination, retaliation towards parents and good teachers, and potential misappropriation of federal funds. That's just getting started. And who other than the parents are concerned for our children? There are close to 600 children with disabilities in the Darien Public Schools, and systemic failures affect every child. At the heart of the story is a brave group of 23 parents who recognized they were being blocked from working with their schools, and we united and filed a petition to stop them. Parents all send their kids to school with the same hopes, that their child will learn, make friends, show academic progress every year. These hopes are the same for parents of children with disabilities. But what we know is that for our children, we follow a different, perhaps slower path because they have disabilities. In the early years, most of us are jumping hurdle after hurdle to identify and treat whatever challenges we can that impact our child. And generally speaking, we take on this job quietly and in the privacy of our homes. Parents of non-disabled children receive their report cards 3 times a year and meet with their teachers to see how their children are progressing. I'm not minimizing that there are challenging issues for all parents with their child's school experience, but I did want to give you a picture of what it might be like to be a parent of a child with disabilities. Because by school age, we are already used to a far different kind of report card. On our own, parents seek help for their children who are not developing typically. And we live in an area, as he mentioned, in Fairfield County, where we have access to world-class experts in childhood disabilities. So our report cards that we carry with us about our children include evaluations from neurologists, therapists, developmental pediatrician, and experts like those at Children's Hospital of Boston and Yale University. And this happens all before they exit elementary school. These medical professionals told us that in order to help our child, we needed to share the private details of their disabilities with the schools because the schools know how to teach disabled children. We are told that when the school has to see the evaluations, it is like giving the teacher, the aide, and the administrator the glasses so they can get just the right prescription to see our children as a learner. Then parents are told something about an IEP, which is an individualized meeting, and a PPT where they'll sit with the teachers and determine the services their child needs. We know it's not perfect, but we had to trust that the principals, administrators, and teachers want to collaborate with parents to help our child make progress. At some point, we all heard of IDEA, the federal law that is there to protect disabled children's civil right to a free and appropriate education. And a few of us know exactly why this law was passed, because our children are the most vulnerable in all of society. And we believed our children's educational needs would be treated with the same respect as their non-disabled peers, and that we would be seen as compassionate parents, just like any other in the school system. And we moved to towns with good schools in a small town, just like Darien. And we send our kids to school thinking they'll be welcomed. But as the result of the experience I have been through, I can now say that we are wrong. What mothers of children with disabilities uncovered working at kitchen tables, I have barely listed above. We uncovered that the school administration, some members of our Board of Education, and a few vocal elected town officials do not welcome us or our children. They aggressively seek to marginalize parents with disabilities, parents of children with disabilities. One such leader even published in our local newspaper, the Darien Times, a calculation of the extra cost per head to educate a special needs child per household, treating us like cattle, so we could demonstrate that parents like me should be happy with what we get, Stay quiet or go away, no matter what illegalities were proven by our petition. I am here to extend the invitation to this press to further investigate the flawed system that is set up to educate our children that has no real consequences for the schools that have failed them. As a society in America, we have struggled and worked to address issues of civil rights and humane treatment for race, religion, gender, and sexuality. But there is a tacit acceptance that discrimination against children with disabilities is almost tolerable. It is a largely ignored frontier by the media, and it is my hope that someone in this room can help to change this for all our children. I want to thank the 24 mothers and fathers who signed the petition, Attorney Andrew Feinstein, Advocate Kathleen Casparino, Molly Van Wagenen, and David DeRoche at the press. He has taken on this story and continues to shed a much-needed spotlight on Darien to try to ensure that the community is accountable for what they are doing to contribute to the ongoing problems within our schools. And I thank you for this award.
The Freedom of Information Award goes annually to a New England journalist or media institution for a body of work from the past calendar year that protects or advances the public's right to know under federal or state law. This year's award goes very deservedly to Brent Curtis and the Rutland Herald. They engaged in hard-nosed reporting and backed it up with a willingness to take on what was a really tough legal battle against the city of Rutland and its police union. And then they exposed a pornography scandal taking place within the police department of the city itself. It began when Brent, who is a reporter for the Herald, requested records of the police department's internal investigations about a detective sergeant and a animal control officer who were alleged to have viewed pornographic material on their work computers. Now, as anyone who will guess who has ever filed a public records request for documents about an internal affairs investigation of the police department, those requests were summarily denied. But the Rutland Herald decided not to let it go then and there. You know, these are economically hard times for this industry. I don't need to tell the people assembled in this room about that. The money and time that goes into litigation is money that can't be spent on reporting, that can't be spent on increasing the salaries of your overworked reporters, and it can be a huge time suck for the newspaper involved, an already overworked organization. But the Herald and Brent Curtis decided it was worth it, and they kept their eyes on the prize. They remembered what they got into this profession for. They sued, and with the very generous assistance of the Burlington law firm of Gravel and Shea, including lawyers Bob Hemley and Matt Byrne, what followed was 3 years of litigation that ended in the Herald's favor last fall. As a result of the records they obtained, the Herald found that the detective sergeant in question had downloaded, get this, 25,839 pornographic images to his computer. You just wonder what happened to public safety in Rutland during all of this time. This included 15 images identified as possible child pornography. The state police launched an investigation but could not determine whether underage subjects were involved, despite the fact that at least one of the bookmarked sites on the sergeant's computer had the word teen in its name. Oh, and the discipline that resulted? The sergeant was placed on paid administrative leave for 2 months during the investigation. And then after the investigation was over, the animal control officer and the sergeant were suspended for 2 weeks without pay. Brent Curtis interviewed Rutland's former mayor and asked the obvious question, why such light punishments? He learned and reported that the sergeant had threatened he'd go public with the names of other officers using pornography at work. And the police chief, in his wisdom, determined that such a move would give his department a black eye. And we wouldn't want to give a black eye to a police department whose officers are routinely downloading pornography, would we? Well, the same sergeant was later assigned to head the Rutland Police Department's Bureau of Criminal Investigations. We only report the news, we can't always make it. But the litigation launched by the Herald resulted in a powerful legal precedent from the Vermont Supreme Court regarding the scope of the investigatory exemption of the Vermont Access to Public Records Act. And in its 19-page ruling, to which 2 of the 5 justices dissented, they rely in part, interestingly enough for this group, on a Rhode Island case. A nice illustration of how the work that we're doing in one state and in one part of this organization can redound to the benefit of the rest of us and how we can build on each other's successes. The 3-judge Vermont Supreme Court majority said, quote, "The public interest in knowing what the government is doing is particularly acute in the area of law enforcement. This includes the public's interest in its learning about the operations of a public agency and in having information openly available to them so that they can be confident in the operation of their government." This strong legal precedent, and by the way, the changes to the Vermont public records law that resulted from the publicity of this entire situation, that's all a team effort. And here to accept the award to Brent Curtis and the Rutland Herald are the team: Brent Curtis, his editor, Alan Keyes, the paper's publisher, John Mitchell, and the paper's lawyer, Matthew Byrne of Gravel and Shea, who Brent has said was pivotal to his getting this award. On behalf of the New England First Amendment Coalition, I proudly present the First Amendment Award to Brent Curtis and the Rutland Herald.
Wow. Thank you all for being here today. I am also a little bit nervous. I'm not used to being in the front of these kind of things. And to add to the level of difficulty for myself, I hand wrote my speech, so not all the pauses are going to be dramatic. I never wanted to fight the court battles that earned this award. I only wanted answers to questions that I thought the public had both an interest and a right to know. And it is upholding that most basic tenet of democratic governance, the public's right to know what its government is doing, that I'm most proud of at the end of the 3-year affair that brought my newspaper's case into multiple courtrooms, including the Vermont Supreme Court, twice. I'm also proud that I work for a newspaper willing to take the political and financial risks that were needed to see our case through, to gain access to the search warrants and internal investigations that were withheld in our case. The newspaper had to go up against City Hall, a municipal union, and the police department. We all know the power that law enforcement wield in our society. They have the power to stop us in our car. They can arrest us and deprive us of our liberties. And in extreme cases, they can wield lethal force. Such great power obviously carries great responsibility, and it also carries a need for great oversight. Perhaps more than any other agency of government, the police department needs to be transparent. Strange that they do not share that conviction. Any police reporter in the room will have stories about difficulties they've had getting general information about criminal investigations from some members. But when the investigations are focused within the ranks, the struggle is increased exponentially. They told us to go away. They told us we had no right to know about their business. But their business is our business. And moreover, it's the prerogative of the people the police swore an oath to serve and protect. Ironically, few of those citizens would have had the time, money, or wherewithal to pursue such a lengthy court case to a successful conclusion. That's why it's so important that newspapers like the Rutland Herald and other media outlets are willing to fight the good fight, not to make a buck, as I heard a lot of times while I was writing this stuff, but so that the public has an insight into what's going on in its most important, arguably most important agency. I would argue that it's a newspaper's journalism's most noble attribute to serve as the champions of free speech and to be truth seekers who are constantly working to shine a light into the dark and often dirty veils of government. In conclusion, I'd like to thank the New England First Amendment Center for honoring me and the Rutland Herald with this award. I'd like to thank our legal team of Gravel and Shea, who I guess if they hadn't been so good at their job, I would probably not be here today. And I'd like to thank some of the, actually I can't thank enough people, they're not all here with me today, but up here on the stage with me, my editor, Alan Keyes, my publisher, John Mitchell. It was a big financial effort to get where we are today, $80,000, which we're still fighting to get back. But it's not just the finances, the financial burden that comes into play. In a small state like Vermont, and in a small city like Rutland, it's hard to rock the boat without making big waves. And we made some big waves. And I'd do it again in a second. Thank you all very much.
Now to introduce our honoree for the Hamlet Award, someone that many of you know or know of, Walter Robinson, better known as Robbie. Robbie is a distinguished professor at Northeastern University, I have to say that, but certainly someone who has distinguished himself in a career of journalism that extends well over 3 decades. He was a political reporter, covered several presidential campaigns. He was the Mideast bureau chief for the Boston Globe during the first of the Persian Gulf War. And many of you probably know of his work. He was the head of the Boston Globe Spotlight team during its investigation into the child pedophilia case with the Archdiocese of Boston, which resulted in the Boston Globe winning the highest award, the gold medal for the Pulitzer Prize. So, Robbie, you can introduce our honoree.
So much for the old adage that reporters like children should be seen and not heard. Thank you all for being here today and for what you had to do to get here. You had to go outdoors. As Tom mentioned, last year a blizzard kicked this event well into April. But this year we've caught it just right. We have a sunny but maybe narrow respite between snowstorms, and we have Jim Risen here. There is no one anywhere on the vast landscape of American journalism who merits this award more than you do. Your willingness, if need be, to forego your own freedom in defense of ours is breathtaking for the courage it took. It is not possible to imagine a more principled and patriotic defense of the First Amendment. For you, and surely for Penny and your family, this is a fix you'd rather not be in. There was no justifiable reason for the government to have put you in this position. There is every justification for the Supreme Court to take your appeal. It is past time for the High Court to sweep aside the muddled 42-year-old precedent that the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals so obviously misconstrued. How on earth could the appeals court have made such an important ruling by leaning on Brandsburg v. Hayes, a 5-4 decision in which the swing vote, Justice Powell, was quite literally of two minds? As most of you know, in 2006, Jim shared the Pulitzer Prize with Eric Lichtblau for his exceptional reporting on a secret and illegal and warrant-free government surveillance program aimed at American citizens. To say that those stories were prescient is a gross understatement. No one handed them a thumb drive with all the documents. Those stories were excavated, a thread pulled at gingerly, a shovel at a time here, a teaspoon there, by tenacious and resourceful reporters of such integrity that their sources in the national security arena trusted them implicitly. Well, that was then, and this is now. Since 2009, we have had a constitutional law scholar in the Oval Office. And, it turns out, a vice president who is so mindful of the First Amendment and what it represents that 2 months ago, he chastised the Chinese government about its intimidation of reporters. It is, as some of you know, not often that Joe Biden speaks in simple declarative sentences that are not subject to misinterpretation. But in his message about what he said to the Chinese, he could not have been clearer. Here is what Joe Biden said. Innovation thrives where people breathe freely, speak freely, are able to challenge orthodoxy, where newspapers can report the truth without fear of consequences. Yet this administration has made American reporters fearful of the consequences of their work. It has bullied journalists with leak investigations. It has secretly monitored their phone calls and emails. It has issued grand jury subpoenas, and it has even made allegations that good reporting in the public interest amounts to espionage. Yes, the Justice Department has backed off, sort of, though they have done nothing to put a stop to the persecution of Jim Reiser. These intimidating tactics have sealed the lips of hundreds of government officials, those who know the truth about decisions that could cost and have cost countless American lives, and about programs that, we now know for a certainty, have severely undermined the civil liberties of all Americans. Without a major course correction, how long will it be until in areas of national security, the only news we will get is what the White House says is news? This is awards season for journalists. The week after next, Pulitzer Prize jurors will gather at Columbia University to comb through hundreds of submissions in the 14 journalism categories. Most all of the entries are extraordinary for their reporting, writing, and commentary. Work that is done and published in the public interest, reporting that rights wrongs, that holds public and private institutions accountable, that strives to infuse democracy with the oxygen without which it cannot be sustained. It is the best journalism in the world. But it is a reminder that most of the important journalism that is done day in and day out anywhere would not be possible but for the freedoms that we are reminded today we should never take for granted. It is for that reminder, Jim, and for your extraordinary selflessness and courage in defense of the First Amendment that the New England First Amendment Coalition is proud to present you with the 2014 Stephen Hamblett First Amendment Award. Before the award is presented, we are grateful today that Jill Abramson, the executive editor of The Times, could be here with us. And we've asked Jill to share her thoughts before the award presentation. Jill, thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. I was kind of hoping that we'd be presenting Jim a cake with a file inside of it. But seeing the slices of cake on the table, I guess that isn't happening. I had the privilege to be in Boston in the fall to speak at a memorial service for Tony Lewis, a fellow Bostonian and someone also of the New York Times bloodlines, who was an incredible champion of the First Amendment. And over the past years, beginning when this unfortunate leak investigation really began in 2008, through the time Tony passed away, the two of us talked many times about the case involving Jim Risen, our dear friend and cherished colleague, whose work both Tony Lewis and I couldn't think more highly of. Jim is the kind of colleague and reporter that every journalist dreams about working with. We actually arrived at the New York Times more or less at the same moment. In the late 90s, Jim had come to the New York Times from the LA Times. I had come from the Wall Street Journal, and we sat right near each other and began reporting for the Times together. I became the Washington bureau chief in 2000 and served in that job for the first Bush administration, which in terms of the First Amendment and reporting on sensitive national security issues was not exactly a walk in the park, as they say in Boston. And Jim and I went through some, I would say, very interesting and somewhat tense negotiations with the Bush White House about some of the stories he was working on in those days. And the leak investigation into the matter that Jim wrote about began in the Bush administration, but the subpoena issued that Jim has resisted cooperating with was issued during the Bush years, but it lapsed actually in 2009, and the Obama administration has chosen to pursue this case against Jim. In both cases, the aim was to put a chill on the kind of exemplary reporting that Jim Risen and his colleagues in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times and at other news organizations do to keep the vital work to keep the public informed. And Bob Kaiser, who used to be the managing editor of the Washington Post, years ago said something that I think bears worth repeating today, that if a war on terror is being waged in the name of the citizens of this country, doesn't the public have a right to be informed about what is involved in it? I just think that's vital. That's the kind of work that Jim does. Despite this leak investigation, one of 7 that the Obama administration has pursued, that is more than twice all the leak investigations that had happened in any presidency up to this one. Jim continues to do what he always has done, which is report, listen to sources, honor the information that they bring to him, check it out, and report newsworthy issues of importance to the public in a fair and deep and probing way. And he continues to do that. His stories continue to run on the front page of our newspaper and lead our website, and stay tuned. He has a really good one coming, and I would go anywhere on earth to honor my friend and my colleague, Jim Risen. So stand up for him, please.
Wow, well, I don't know if I deserve any of that, but thank you very much. Thank you, Jill. That was really kind remarks. And Robbie, thank you very much. I really am almost without, not sure what to say because of this great honor that you guys have given me. I just want to thank the First Amendment Center and the Hamblett family, which I met today, and I feel like I'm coming home because my first job, the first time I ever got paid to be a reporter was as a campus stringer for the Providence Journal when I was a student at Brown. And I don't think I wrote anything worthwhile, but it was the first time I really got hooked on being a newspaper reporter. And so I wanted to thank everyone here. I don't think you understand what this award means to me in terms of the feeling of support that I now have. It's been a long marathon on this legal case, and to know that the journalism community is supporting me really means a lot and sustains me and my family. And I want to thank, there's a lot of people to thank. I want to thank the New York Times for supporting me throughout this entire period. It's been a long haul, and sometimes, I think as Jill knows, it makes it difficult sometimes to keep, developing sources and getting stories and everything. But I just want to thank Jill and everyone else at the Times for their support. And last but not least, I want to thank my wife, Penny, and my family that has stood by me during this whole time period. And Penny is a journalist. We met in journalism school, and she understands a lot of what I've been going through. It's meant a lot to me. So I thought I would just talk a little bit about how we got here, because this is a completely alien environment from when I was a stringer for the Providence Journal. I never thought, in 1977, I never thought that we would see an environment where you had to worry about things like this, that for doing your job as a reporter, you would be called a traitor and end up in jail. You always thought that was what happened in Russia or in China or someplace like that. And so I've thought a lot about, what it is, what really changed in our profession or in the country or politically or in the government. And I think, if you don't mind, I'll go through a little bit of what I think has happened, and what we in the profession can do about it. I think when I first started working in newspapers in the late 70s, we were still in a kind of, the nation was still in kind of an era of reform. It was kind of a second progressive era. I think the post-Watergate period was kind of a golden age for oversight and for the push for transparency in government, and the role of journalism was seen as a positive in society after Woodward and Bernstein. And I think that period lasted for a while, and it was reinforced by the kind of reforms that the government had, especially in the national security area, where the Church Committee and other reformist activities developed a kind of a whole set of rules and regulations that governed the way the American military, the national security, and intelligence communities all interacted with the public and with the press and with Congress. And you developed new oversight by Congress of the intelligence community, which had never happened before in any real sense. And that period, that kind of new structure, reformist structure that led to much improved newspaper and media coverage of intelligence and national security throughout the late 70s and 80s and 90s really was still in place, I think, and was active. When I first started covering the CIA in 1995 for the Los Angeles Times in Washington, I remember my first few encounters with the CIA. It was, I guess you would now look back and realize it was a peacetime CIA, and the agency had developed a kind of an understanding between the press and the CIA and the other intelligence agencies. They would get upset when you found something out, and they would, the press office of the CIA would complain the fact that you had found something out, and then after a few minutes of complaining, they would start to cooperate with you and talk to you about, whatever it was that you were working on, and they would eventually, after several rounds of complaining phone calls, they would arrange for interviews with top officials in order to flesh out the details and make sure you had a good understanding from their point of view of whatever it was that you were writing about. And that was kind of and then after the story would come out, and there would be, the agreement was usually that you wouldn't identify the fact that the CIA had helped you or had talked to you or had, or arranged for interviews with senior officials. Then when the story came out, they would, tell other reporters, I don't know where that story came from, that was terrible. And then they would go on television and say, it's awful that this kind of journalism is happening. But that was like, it was kind of like Casablanca, we were shocked that gambling's going on. And that was kind of the state of play when I first started covering the CIA. They would occasionally have leak investigations, but back then in the 90s, a leak investigation, at least as far as I could ever tell, involved somebody at the CIA telling the lawyer for the CIA, I'm really upset that that story ran. Can you do something about it? And the lawyer would say, yeah, sure. And they would send a memo around, and they would ask everybody, did you talk to that reporter? And they would say, no. And then that would be the end of the leak investigation. And so there was this long period, maybe 30-year period, where there was a kind of a weird understanding between the press and the government over national security reporting, where we would report as aggressively as possible. They would try to work with us within reason. They would complain about certain things. But even when there were stories that they really disliked and really were upset about, they would never, go to the mats. They would never begin these really aggressive actions against reporters. I believe that now what we're seeing is part of the larger post-9/11 political climate that has changed America. And I think we're now into the second decade of the transformation of our culture in ways that none of us want to really acknowledge. Because it's so depressing and ugly to think about how much the United States has changed since 9/11 because of our fixation and obsession with the threat or supposed threat of terrorism. I think that we have allowed ourselves to become a security state in ways that none of us, looking back, recognize because it's happened so incrementally and gradually. I think what this is part of that. What's happened is that beginning with the Valerie Plame investigation in, I think it was 2004, in which another New York Times reporter was caught up, Judy Miller, the government began to subpoena reporters for the first time in a meaningful way. If you remember that case, it was a very convoluted case. But in the end, the Justice Department and the Bush administration brought in a special prosecutor who had independent powers separate from the Attorney General, which allowed him to subpoena reporters without getting the Attorney General's approval. And Patrick Fitzgerald, who was that special prosecutor, began subpoenaing reporters all over Washington to talk to them about who leaked Valerie Plame's identity. I think that case and Fitzgerald's role changed that 30-year understanding that had been in existence between the press and the government, and led to, and it actually created, Fitzgerald became kind of a hero within the legal community and within the Justice Department. And then I think after that, within the Justice Department, there's lots of prosecutors who now want to become the next Pat Fitzgerald and get a whistleblower or reporter scalp onto their belt. But I think what then that led to, it kind of broke as I said, broke the seal on this agreement. And at the same time, the climate in the United States had changed to such a degree that there was a belief that a lot of people were willing to believe it when the government would say that reporting on the war on terror or revealing certain aspects of the war on terror was somehow disloyal, was somehow an act of treason, or that it was somehow damaging national security. And that became the mantra both first of the Bush administration and then of the Obama administration. And I think the only great surprise is that there was so little change from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. My case began in 2008 when I was first subpoenaed, and the judge in this case in Virginia, in Alexandria, Virginia, named Brinkema, clearly, she never said this, but it was clear she thought that this case was going to end after the presidential election. And there were a whole series of, I won't bore you with all the details, but there was a whole series of legal actions throughout 2008 in which it became obvious, at least to me, that the judge was playing for time and waiting to see who was going to be the new president and what was going to happen, because she didn't want to deal with this political hot potato. And so in the summer of 2009, after Obama had been elected and Eric Holder was Attorney General, she issued this very brief notice to my lawyers. It was like a year and a half after I'd first been subpoenaed. She issued a little notice that said, my clerk informs me that the grand jury in this case has now expired, and I assume that means that this subpoena is now moot. And what she was doing was inviting the Obama administration to quietly drop this case. And instead, the Obama administration replied immediately, saying, no, we don't want to drop this case. We want to renew this subpoena. And ever since, they have been just as aggressive, if not more aggressive on this case, and in other leak investigations than the Bush administration was. And that's been the great mystery, I think, to a lot of people about why the Obama administration has taken the attitude towards the press in general that they have. And I think after you've been president for a few years, I think you have to assume that the general tenor and policy climate created in an administration stems from the beliefs of the president. And so I think one has to assume that the president likes the fact that the Justice Department is prosecuting a lot of leak investigations. I think to me, I kind of felt like a precursor to what's happened since then. As you know, the Justice Department began to go after the Associated Press. They began to go after Fox News. They began to go after pretty much anybody who stuck their head up and wrote a controversial story on national security. They've conducted leak investigations of other New York Times stories, and they, as you know, have prosecuted Bradley Manning and now are threatening to prosecute Edward Snowden. This climate is difficult to see where this leads. That's the real thing that concerns me is, what happens next? What do they do if reporters and whistleblowers begin to be silenced? And where are the limits that the Obama administration wants to place? And what I think they really want, and what I think every administration dreams of, but this administration is now in the process of trying to achieve, is they want to create narrow pathways for reporting, acceptable reporting in Washington. They want to create kind of an interstate highway where you can drive acceptable newspaper stories or television broadcasts, but you can't go off to the side in either direction. And I think that is kind of the goal, is to limit the awareness of the public about national security issues. One of my friends and colleagues, Dana Priest, has said frequently that the war on terror is the first real classified war. It's the first war that the entire war has been conducted in secret and in classified manner. And if you think back to 2001, and I've had this mental exercise with myself several times, and it's difficult to think of something that doesn't fit into this. I think it's difficult to think of any major aspect of the global war on terror that wasn't first disclosed in the media. In other words, the government has not disclosed any significant action or activity or operation first. I think about one of the first things that comes to mind in my mind is the predator, the armed predator. That has become such a commonplace thought among us today and the government now talks about it freely. But the fact that there were armed predators in Afghanistan was classified and only became public when the New Yorker first wrote about it in, I think, late 2001 or early 2002. And so that's the kind of basic fact that everyone now assumes the government was responsible for releasing, which we have to realize only came out because of someone in the press talking to someone anonymously in the government. And so I think that's what's at risk, is fighting an entire world war in total secret without anyone knowing what we're doing. And that, to me, is what is at stake, and it's what I'm trying to fight for, because I think if we don't stand up now, it'll only get worse. So thank you very much. This honor means a lot to me. It really sustains me, and your support really help me keep going. So thank you very much.
Copies of Jim's book are on sale at the NEMPA desk if you want to see the story behind this story. Jim, thank you very much. In many ways, I think of Jim like that, the iconic photograph of the lone protester in Tiananmen Square standing in front of that tank and saying, in effect, stop. And that's what he's doing. And I invite all of us to stand there with him. He's not alone. And hopefully we will stop that from happening. Thank you so much, Jim. I want to thank our other award winners also. Delightful to hear your stories. Congratulations for all that you're doing, and keep it up. Thank you all for attending. There's information about the coalition that's in the back, and we're going to be holding the First Amendment Coalition's Institute September 28th, and we invite reporters to apply. This is a 3-day workshop where we work primarily with the younger reporters on how to take advantage of the laws that are here to ensure, again, which our mission of transparency and openness in government. So if you're interested in that, please apply. Once again, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate your presence.